Hello, welcome in everybody. Professor Zeeb here, and welcome to our short lecture on long-term regulation of hunger. So we've been learning about different short-term mechanisms in play. Well, thank goodness, it turns out our body has these long-term mechanisms in play to basically prevent or correct short-term errors in hunger. So what we're sort of looking at here is how our hunger is being motivated and changed over time in more the long-term period. So have you ever wondered, like when we go through the holidays, for example, Thanksgiving and Christmas and so forth, where you're eating a lot more food than normal, you may notice that the days following that, you may not feel as hungry as you normally do. Have you ever wondered why that is? Well, we're going to sort of attempt to answer that question by doing a little short presentation here. So it turns out that our body has something called the set point. No, we're not talking tennis here, we're talking actual biology. So a set point technically is this optimal weight level that the body works to maintain. In other words, what it's basically saying is that our bodies love this particular average weight, and it takes measures to make sure that that weight stays around that average. So for example, if you start gaining a few pounds, it'll take measures to get you back down. And if you've been losing weight, well, it'll take certain measures to get you back up to that average. So in other words, it's kind of like our average weight that the body works to maintain. We know that part of this is controlled by a hormone that was mentioned previously known as leptin. Leptin is this hormone, as it turns out, that is produced by fat cells. More specifically, the amount of leptin produced is in proportion to the total amount of fat that you actually have at any given time. In other words, if you have a lot more fat than you normally do, you would be producing more leptin, and vice versa. So it seems to be in proportion to the amount of fat you actually have. Well, what leptin does and how it's related to this is it actually alters the activity of these cells in the hypothalamus, which is our hunger regulation center of the brain. It's also related to puberty, as it turns out, but in our case here, it will change how you experience the sensation of hunger. In other words, what we've discovered is that if we have a lot of leptin present in our system, meaning that you've been gaining weight, it will alter the brain to such an extent that you don't feel as hungry as you normally do, to allow you to get back down to your set point. If the levels of leptin go down, in other words, you've been losing weight, you don't have as many fat cells as you normally do, it will also create changes in the brain to make you hungrier than you normally are, and thus allow you to gain more weight to get back up to your average. So in other words, in a way, it's similar to homeostasis, where our body's working to maintain this particular average or set point, and basically keeps us on track. We have discovered that it is related to obesity. People who lack the genes to produce leptin can actually become obese. In other words, what we're kind of saying there is they may not be responding to leptin, or their leptin levels become different, and therefore they may feel as if they're starving all the time. They're not reacting to it, and they continue to eat. In fact, they've actually tried giving injections of leptin to obese people, and it does work for some people, but for not everyone. So what we're thinking is that in some cases, we're finding that obese people may be just insensitive or grow insensitive to leptin, and therefore it contributes to the problem. So the point of that short lecture here is just to kind of show you the connection of this hormone leptin to our weight levels and how it sort of corrects things in more the long term. All right, so thank you for listening, and please continue to the next step in the class.